Hello and welcome to the second part of this video. This time we will talk about the structure side and more in depth about organization. So how can you organize a team in a constructive way? Obviously these are all just my opinions, so yeah, I'm pretty sure there are more than one way to organize a team effectively, but this is basically how I think a team should be organized or structured. So let's talk a bit about scrims. There are three different types of scrims. You have the experimental scrum, you have the practice scrum, and you have the performance scrum. So what's the difference? The experimental scrum is obviously to experiment with different strategies, compositions, or anything like this. The most important part is always like the goal setting of each of these scrums. So the experimental scrum has the goal to try out new stuff. We want to try out a different comp. We want to try out a different line of communication. We want to try out a lot of different things. We haven't really talked in depth in a coaching session about how it could work or how it works, how we want to redo anything. We just have an idea and say, okay, you know what? Let's just do it. Let's just try and see if this has potential or if this is something we can follow up to. So we can try and work on different communication style, comms, and a lot of things. This is experimental scrums. The practice scrum has the goal to obviously practice a certain thing. And in practice, I mean, you have already talked about in a coaching session about a certain technique you want to implement in your gameplay. This could be, again, a different composition. This could be, again, communication. But in the practice scrum, you really hard focus on this type. That means, let's say we want to play goats. It's like obviously older matter, but I think it's still a good example. If we want to play goats and we talked about how we want to play it, or maybe even how we want to react to different enemies, and then we scrim and scrim and scrim. We obviously always hard like only pick goats, and there will be no other thing because the goal of this whole scrim is not to win the game or anything. It's just to practice goats. And obviously the enemies will not play the whole time mirror, they will also play something else, and sometimes they even hard counter us. Um, but you still keep playing goats, not really to to win against the enemy hard counter, but more to practice your, let's say in goats, for example, rotations or your communication in the comp. So it's really all about practicing your one style that you want to play, and it doesn't really matter what the enemies do. You play basically for you. You don't play to like for the enemies or win against enemies. If they even hard counter you, you practiced just other things to make them cleaner, make rotations cleaner, make communication structures cleaner, make callouts cleaner, or anything like this. But you have to set up this goal before the scrum. So before you go into the scrum, you say, our goal is now practicing goats or practicing even more in-depth thing like communication or communicating ultimates even more. Like it's something you want to set up. Obviously, you don't want to be too detailed because some things are just not effect. Like you cannot practice everything in a scrim environment. For example, dive against uh, sh- don't know spam comps. Then what if the enemies don't play the spam comp? So you need to have a goal that is general and not too specific, but workable on every term. If you really want to practice dive against spam, then you can say this and say, okay, hey, this scrim we want to practice dive against spam. So every time the enemies pick spam, you just swap to dive and try to play against them. Obviously, they will mostly swap on maps where they have an advantage with with spam, but it doesn't really matter because as I said, we don't play to win, we just play for us to improve. And yes, this not that easy to master in practice, like in the reality, because sometimes it's the things get messy and swapping around in a like in a game is also not the best thing to do. Um, but yeah, you need to set up goals before and practice them. This is, I mean, the biggest part of practice scrims. And good communication between coaches who want to pursue these goals and players who have to execute this can help to reduce frustration from them. And how exactly you can do this, I will talk about this later. And then performance scrum, obviously it's the kind of the tournament preparation, or it's basically a we want to win. Like our goal here is to win the game, and this mostly means with everything necessary. It's also nice for you as a coach to see if you say we have now a performance scrum. You obviously will not coach anything between the scrum. You will just let them play as it would be a tournament for like I don't know best of 7 series or anything, and they play everything like they play on the best of their abilities with all hidings, with if possible if you can talk to your scrim partners also with staggering, with everything they have. And there you can also see, are they comfortable enough playing the things you practiced? For example, if they stick to one composition, like if they practice the whole week one composition, but then when they actually have to win, they still prefer in some situations to switch to something else, or they do a lot of hiding things or something. Then you can see, okay, maybe your team is not comfortable enough to play on this composition yet, especially not if they want to win. But for this, you also need the team to be really focused on winning the game and not really on practicing. So there has to be a difference, a big difference also for the players that if you have a performance scrum, then you just want to win the game and you don't want to practice something you have played in a whole week. Like it doesn't really matter what you have done in the past. Obviously, you want to implement this if possible, but you played what you think is best. And if you don't think the composition that you practiced the whole week is the best, or in this situation, then you don't play it. You play just the things where you have the highest percentage of winning. So let's talk now also about like general scrum experience or general things you have to think about if you want to set up a scrum. And let's just write general. So what I think is best, if you definitely want to meet 10 minutes before a scrum, and in this 10 minutes you do not really want to kind of talk about any theory or anything. You just want to remind them of the goals, what they want to do. For example, practice. Let's say we want to practice goats. Then in 10, like in the 10 minutes before the scrim, you talk about the fundamentals of goats. You talk about what exactly you want to practice. Like think about uh, our main tank causes rotation there. We always speed boost here. We do this and this and this. Just to remind them, not really to go over it or even have a discussion. It's just about reminding them what the goal is and also to communicate, especially if we have a practice scrum, performance scrum, or experimental scrum. Um, yeah, best case they should already know this, and it should be written down somewhere in the calendar. Then in the scrum, you it depends. Like in the experimental scrum, I think you as a coach can be very active. You can um, talk between the maps and give some ideas to the players and try if they and see if they kind of adapt to this or if they want to try something else out. I think here you can really be really vocal. In a practice scrum, it's more about obviously practicing these things, but it's also not necessary, I think, to talk about every mistake or everything they did wrong in each or between all the maps. Like scrimming is for playing. Scrimming is for playing and not for coaching. If you want to coach, then you have a coaching session or what you do. But if they really scrim, and especially in the practice game, let them play. Let them play, and after this you can talk about the mistakes. So obviously you can point out crucial things and crucial situations where they need to improve, but think about it this way: if you play dive on map one, and the second the second map, like the map after this, will be King's Row, where dive is, let's say, not the best composition to pick, then it doesn't really matter how much they did wrong on dive, and you do not really need to talk about dive at all because they will not implement this in the second map anyways. And after the second map, they already forgot what you talked about the first map. So really, if they practice something, you let them practice, and you also let them fail multiple times so that they can realize, okay, here we did a mistake, or we did something wrong, or this doesn't work. And then in a coaching session, or what we can talk about this in depth, why it didn't work, what they did wrong, and all of these things. So I would say, like, if you're in an experimental swim, you can be really vocal. Let's make another color. We use this. In the practice scrum, it's yeah, you can be giving directions, but not too much. And obviously, I think this is self-explanatory in a performance scrum. Like you do nothing. You don't talk. You don't give them any instructions. It's all about winning the game, and they have to perform without the coach at all. So you do not even have to be there, to be honest. You can just watch the VODs because you shouldn't have any impact on the game anyways. There's no talking between the maps, nothing. Even if they're super frustrated, then you want to see how they deal with it, how to deal with the frustration, and how maybe somebody in the team steps up to to remove this frustration or anything. But you are not present. Um, yeah, and I guess the last thing I already mentioned it a lot, but I wrote down as my last notes is that basically coach them with a direction. Especially thinking about like the practice or experimental scrum. Don't tell them things they don't like. Don't change your goal of the day in the scrum. If your goal is to run goats and practice goats, but then they don't know, they do you lose the whole time or they're frustrated or anything, like I don't think it's a good idea to swap the goal and say, okay, you're frustrated now, let's play something else. They have to go through it, and there are other ways to work against frustration. For example, you can make a break. You can talk about some fundamentals again. You can even don't know, show them things what they did wrong. For example, showing them in a coaching session you already did something. Here, look, we talked about this situation, and just take 5 minutes out of the room. But the goal should be the same, and they should not you shouldn't change this because talking about this in the future in coach sessions and what we use is really important, so you can see, okay, this is good or this is bad, and there is also the point where you can decide, okay, after now playing this and after understanding what we did wrong, we as a team now make the decision that this composition is not for us and we don't want to play this anymore. But just in the heat of action, we say, nah, goats, we suck at it, we cannot play it. It's we don't want to play it and we play it now only dive. Doesn't really make sense. You want to talk about it first, and then after this, you want to make a decision, where especially when you're not playing. Yeah, and I think that's it about scrims. And yeah, next time we will talk about the communication, also in the structure department.